Today we'll be looking at a couple of types of radio frequency electronic surveillance devices, specifically body-worn transmitters. Nowadays there are plenty of ways for government and law enforcement agencies to eavesdrop using all sorts of technology, but back in the 1990s lots of this activity was done using unencrypted, unsecured radio. There was a small selection of units designed for American law enforcement and intelligence agencies by very few manufacturers. The main ones included Audio Intelligence Devices, or AID, Bell and Howell, who were known for their KEL units, and Motorola. Nearly every police agency in most US states and the majority of federal agencies used AID devices back in the early to mid-1990s. The backbone of their transmitter line was the TX903 unit. It was a 1-watt crystal-controlled device almost the size of a packet of cigarettes, but only 2/3 as thick. It was powered by two 9-volt batteries which were in parallel fitted to the bottom of the unit. The external controls on the top of the unit consisted of an on-off switch, a sub-miniature microphone connector, and a miniature BNC connector. The microphones that were provided with the units were essentially hearing aid microphones built into a larger case. The antenna was simply a piece of RG174 coax with the end stripped to form a dipole. The frequency range was normally 150 to 174 MHz, with 136 to 150 MHz being a special order, primarily for overseas use. There was a product line in the 216 to 220 MHz band, but like units manufactured in the 406 to 420 MHz band, they weren't big sellers. The units were crystal controlled and the transmitter was tailored to produce the maximum audio for intelligence. The audio was narrowband FM, which was convenient because some federal agencies such as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, or the ATF, operated their transmitters on their primary two-way radio channel of 165.2875 MHz. This way all of their mobile and portable units could monitor the covert transmissions from the radio bugs. The frequencies were located anywhere in the 165 MHz range, although most police departments use the 165 to 168 MHz range. An exception was the Drug Enforcement Administration, or the DEA, whose transmitters operated in the 170 to 172 MHz range. These are the common frequencies used in earlier AID equipment, and in most of the newer equipment sold by AID, the actual frequencies weren't given on the device, but were colour-coded instead. There were also repeaters used on these bodybug channels. The Broward County Sheriff's Department in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, had one that had an input of 159.190 MHz and a 15-watt repeater output of 154.950 MHz. The FCC allocated frequencies for wireless microphones, but they had limited power output, not the 1 watt that the AID units had. These frequencies could usually be heard at fast food drive-through windows, and what people used to do was to scan through these frequencies in an area known for illegal activity, such as prostitution or drug sales. If they were lucky, they could often hear an actual undercover deal going down. Of course, once you had this information, you had to keep it to yourself. The police would have been less than thrilled to know that you knew their secret frequency, and the bad guys might have decided to make you disappear because of what you knew. So that's the scoop on electronic surveillance transmitters, but what about the receiving end? The basic intelligence kits manufactured by Audio Intelligence Devices, KEL and some others usually consisted of a transmitter, a receiver and a tape recorder. Now don't forget we're talking the early 1990s here, so there's also a pair of heavy-duty NiCad batteries to power the unit. The early units manufactured by AID were built into a case the size of a medium suitcase. In this case was a reel-to-reel tape recorder before cassette recorders came in, as well as a 6-channel VHF receiver and the batteries. The newer intelligence kits that came along were built into a briefcase. They had a cassette recorder and a receiver. The AID units used the basic 6-channel receiver. Now, these receivers also tune to the 30 to 50 MHz range in Wideband FM. Why? Well, AID and others manufactured numerous devices in the 35 to 40 MHz region. One unit looked like a wall socket and came in different colours and styles. The wall socket in the target area was replaced with one of these units. It transmitted in the 35 to 40 MHz region and coupled back into the power lines for its antenna. As long as the target paid his power bill, authorities could listen. There were several other devices in this range manufactured for intelligence work. One of these was a small device that hung behind a curtain. It was a free-running oscillator powered by a hearing aid battery and put out about 1 milliwatt, which meant it could transmit for about a week without a battery change. Being wideband, the audio sounded good. There was also a drop-in telephone mouthpiece that received its power from the phone lines. All they had to do was unscrew the telephone mouthpiece, take out the old one and drop in the new one. The intelligence kits had a cassette recorder and a NiCad power supply along with charging circuitry. The price, which included the transmitter, receiver, cassette recorder and power supply, was in the $5,000 to $7,000 range, which by today's standard is anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000.